Today's topic is officially called R7 2020's Top 7 Risks. This topic is one that Dan tackles every year on our blog, called R7 The Top 7 Risks. But here at Infotex, we believe that if you are watching this, you are your organization's superhero. In the interest of time, let me dive right into introducing our presenter, Dan Hadaway, who has been working with small banks since 2001. Dan?
Well, thank you very much, Michael, and thank you very much for dedicating 30 minutes of your very busy schedule to watch this movie. Not only am I appreciative of that, but more importantly, your information security officer appreciates it because, it shows the board's on board, right? But even more importantly, your customers, they might not realize they appreciate that you're spending this time, but by you watching this movie, ultimately, your customers are going to be safer. And really, we're going to talk about that, about the board's role in making our customers safer, the board's role in cybersecurity. And then we'll talk about the top risks that the typical community-based bank faces in 2020. And then finally, we'll talk about how you can actually put your role to work in making our customers safer. Now, what we like to do is we like to use the metaphor of the canary in the coal mine to help non-technical people understand how they plug into cybersecurity. So just by quick review, back in the day before we had the technology to determine chemicals in the air, right? We would, well, not we, but coal miners would put canaries at strategic locations in the coal mine, and then the miners were supposed to watch those canaries, and if they looked sick, that was their cue to get the heck out of the coal mine before methane gas blew everybody up or other people got sick from ingesting the methane gas or whatever. And so from a metaphorical perspective, then what we're really wanting to do is make sure that we're managing the sick birds that our information security system may experience because of new threats, new risks, new assets, new everything, right? And so, metaphorically, when we talk about the board's role, what we're really saying is, are we checking them birds? Are we watching the birds? What's kind of terrible is if after all the effort that the owner of the coal mine would go through to put the canary strategically in the coal mine, if the miners just kept walking past a dead bird, that would be terrible, right? But that happens in cybersecurity way too often. And so we need the board to make sure the management team remembers that they should be checking them birds. Meanwhile, then, in terms of the metaphor and the agenda for today, what we're going to be talking about when we get to the top risks for 2020 is what can make those canaries sick in 2020. And then finally, let's question them birds. How do we go about asking the right questions to make sure that our canaries are staying healthy? And so, are we checking them birds? The role that you face as a director in a bank. There was a time, just so you know, between 2000 and 2006, I would present to the boards of many different banks, and we didn't really have any guidance to go by yet. And so we would just rely on CIA, is what we called it, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And we talked to directors about how this is what we mean by information security. And it didn't take long for us to add legal and compliance to those three because you're a bank, right? And so there's all kinds of legal and compliance risk, and that's how auditing got started, right? But let's face it, because you're a bank, your reputation is very, very important, and thus tabletop testing your incident response plan, tabletop testing your business continuity plan is something that was kind of an important control to have in place. But I want you to know that what we kind of learned over the years is, though this is kind of a good, starting point to go by in terms of defining what your role is, it's really kind of meaningless unless we keep our management team focused in on protecting our customers. Your role as a board member is to make sure that the management team doesn't get so bogged down in all this stuff that they lose sight of what the primary goal is, which is to protect our customers. Now, it wasn't until 2015, 9 years after the guidance came out in 2006, that articulated the board's role. that we had any other kind of guidance. But in 2006, the FFIEC published the Information Security Handbook that said, it actually articulated your role, and we kind of simplified it into two directions. You look backwards and you look forwards as a director. And so when you review your vendor risk reports, when you review your audit reports, when you review that annual report to the board, I hope you all recognize when I say the annual report to the board, that's really looking backwards. Your information security officer is basically saying, here's what happened. And that's very important, and the guidance kind of articulates how important it is that as a director, you review these reports. And then looking forwards, you're involved in policy approval, you're reviewing the results of various risk assessments, including your Graham-Leach-Bliley risk assessment, and now your 2015 risk assessment, your cybersecurity assessment tool assessment, right? But suffice it to say, you have to approve new technologies. Ultimately, you have to approve the IT audit plan. That's all looking forward. And this is all great and fine and dandy, but I just want you to momentarily kind of put this aside and realize that the reason all this is in place is because what your true role is to make sure that the management team doesn't get so bogged down on all this that they forget to protect our customers. So as a director of a bank, you want to make sure that we're staying focused on the true goal, which is protecting our customers. And then again, in 2015 was the next guidance that came out since 2006 that actually addressed what the board of directors should do. There was a 5-step program they wanted you to go through, but ultimately what came out of that program that the board is still responsible for is what we call your cybersecurity risk appetite statement. But it was that original statement in the second step of the cybersecurity assessment tool process that basically said, what maturity level do we want to be at? What inherent risk level do we want to be at? And that's all fine and dandy, right? But again, what you should be asking is, how do these baseline statements in our cybersecurity assessment tool help us protect our customers? If we can keep management focused in on how all these details protect our customer, then you're fulfilling a very important role. And the only people that really can fulfill that role are the directors of a bank. Are we checking them birds is really the main role that you play as a director. And really there's 3 different areas we're going to talk about a little bit later here that you can focus those questions on. But suffice it to say, over the years, what we've learned that in order for a bank to stay safe, they need to be ready for an audit at any time. There shouldn't be some kind of a big to-do list to get ready for an audit. We should always be ready for audits. We should have a good awareness training program in place, and we should have the ability to manage new risks as we bring in new assets, as we hire new vendors, or as new threats arise. Which brings me really to the second section here of this movie, which is what can make our birds sick in 2020? I mean, what are the risks that most community-based banks are addressing right now? And so every year at the end of the year, my team and I compile what we call the top 7 risk list. And what this is really meant for is to help me guide the boards that I'm speaking to as an auditor when we do our audit debriefings and help them understand how their specific risks relates to the risks that the community at large is addressing. Suffice it to say, these might not be the top 7 risks in your bank. These are just the top 7 risks that most typical community-based banks are struggling with in 2020, starting with the fact that our customers are really where the weakness is now. The good news is we've done a really good job of hardening our posture as a bank. I mean, it's a lot harder to hack into a bank in 2020 than it was in 2019, 2015, 2010, but way back in 2020 when we first started realizing the risk, right? But our customers are soft, a lot of them, our commercial customers especially, but also our retail customers. We've all heard of the corporate account takeover, we abbreviate it as the keto, right? But nowadays, the bad guys are populating databases identifying who the wealthy people are in America so that they can go after their bill pay accounts. And then, of course, we have a new attack vector, and it's not really that new. It's been around for years and years, but it's starting to materialize one that's being exercised a lot more by malicious actors, and that's called the business email compromise. This is actually a threat vector that you might want to be, concerned about in your own business, because it's meant to talk business owners into sending money to mules. And what the business email compromise looks like is somebody compromises a business owner's account, and then they email to the CFO of the business or the accounting person with the ability to transfer money or wire money, and that's how they get money out of the bank's account. They often use this application, it's called Zeus, to get malware on their victims' systems. And Zeus is just one of many different malware designer engines that the bad guys are using to target banks, but more importantly, bank customers. And it's not really more importantly, it's just more likely that they're targeting bank customers now. And what we got to realize is that malware is no longer just a virus anymore. The bad guys are leveraging artificial intelligence, they're leveraging big data. They're really developing a good profit engine. I mean, if you think about it, the money that's being made in cybercrime is just astronomical. And and by the way, to answer this question, is it $70 trillion? Back in 2017, Bitcoin was $14,000 a coin, and thus $5 billion in Bitcoin is actually $70 trillion worth of money was spent unlocking ransomware keys in 2017. And the solution, by the way, is vulnerability management. We're certainly not going to be able to go into it in this movie, but if you'd like to watch a movie that's specifically geared towards directors about the solution to malware and other problems related to technical attacks, both on banks but also on small businesses, this would be a great movie for you to check out. The third risk that small community-based banks face in 2020 is the longest reigning risk. I mean, this was on our original list that we made in 2007 or 2008. I don't know exactly when we first started the top 7 risks list. But suffice it to say, this actually started off as 2 different bullet points, and they kind of evolved over time. The user bullet point, there's really users can make mistakes, and vendors can make mistakes, right? And so we kind of combined them into one risk just because we wanted to make room on our top 7 list for newer risks. But this has been on the risk since day one, and it's really the risk that most banks are still struggling with, because as we hire new people, we need to get them into the right habits and disciplines to protect information. I mean, if you think about it, 70% of incidents are still caused by users making mistakes. And it's not just in our bank, it's in our vendors' user base. It's in our customers' user base, where they could go to the wrong web page, they could click on the wrong link, or they could just give out the wrong information over the telephone, right? So our vendors, are still making mistakes. And you got to keep in mind that it's the smaller vendors like infotex, a local vendor, that our customers are not going to forgive us for. And so we have to have a vendor management program in place that will address this risk. The next risk is due to a new guidance that was published on November 14th, 2019. And it really kind of introduced a paradigm shift in the way we think about availability risk. And it's mainly compliance risk, but know that the FFIEC and the examiners are saying that supervision will be swift, that they're not going to give us a couple years to respond to this guidance before they start asking about it. It's there's a short punch list of what needs to happen to come into compliance with this guidance. Starting with the fact that we want to update our business impact analysis by establishing maximum tolerable downtimes or MTDs for each of our assets. Right now we have what we call a recovery time objective, right? Which says that, hey, if this asset goes down, we want to be able to bring it back up and running within 4 hours or 24 hours or whatever. But when will our customers start getting irritated? Because we want to make sure our RTO is less than our maximum tolerable downtime. Then meanwhile, dependencies need to be defined for each asset, which is not going to be easy. One of the things that most information security officers of banks have been complaining about is the fact that they need to draw data flow diagrams. Well, guess what? That can be leveraged to help us determine dependencies when we update our business impact analysis. Testing has been clarified. There was always a vague guidance on how to test your business continuity plan. And we're going to need to work on our tabletop tests, our resiliency tests, our failover tests to make sure that they come in compliance with guidance. I don't know if you remember, but way back in 2005, 2006, the feds, went around and made sure that every bank had a pandemic plan. 14 years later, and we still haven't suffered from a pandemic, but it is time to, take them out, dust them off, update them. And we do believe it's something that your examiners are going to be looking for when they come back in to examine your bank. The paradigm shift is important. What they're really doing is they're basically saying that, business continuity is one big umbrella that has underneath it anything related to availability risk, but also emergencies due to technology. And so your bank really has two different documents that will address this guidance. The first being your business continuity plan, and your second one being your incident response plan. And they are meant for two different types of emergencies. The business continuity plan is meant for availability emergencies. We lose power, or we have a flood, there's an ice storm or whatever. The incident response plan is meant to address incidents related to technology, ultimately those that might require that we notify our customers. And hopefully you're realizing that as a director of the bank, the most important priority of both of these incidents is to make sure that we're protecting our customer. Beyond, protecting life and safety, we want to make sure that we're protecting our customers. And what we always need to remember is that when we're in an incident, whether it's related to a disaster or whether it's related to technology, a security breach or whatever, the way we act is being watched very closely by a lot of people, including our customers. And so during an incident, we exude what our priorities are. And we're really kind of at a crossroads in the information highway, so to speak, right? And what I mean by that is that we could choose to protect our reputation, or we could choose to protect our customers' information. And it's kind of ironic that we've got to make that choice, because it was the incorrect protection of information that got us in the predicament we're in the first place, right? But suffice it to say that if we choose to protect reputation over protecting information, is what kills our reputation. Do you remember the word Equifax? Let's face it. When they decided that selling stock and then disclosing, when they decided that they were going to make sure that their own people were safe and then give their customers the ability to protect themselves, that's when they destroyed their reputation. So there is a movie on our website that's meant to help you understand your role in incident response. Of all the movies we've talked about today, I would feel like this is probably one of the more important ones for you to watch, because it really is you, a director of the bank, who can remind our management team, hey, that's okay, we're going to protect our customers, because doing that will circle back around and protect our reputation. That movie, by the way, talks about how we can turn a lemon into lemonade. The fifth risk that we face because we're a bank that collects information is what we call pretext calling risk. People are calling banks right now and getting our customers to give them information that should not be given unless the caller is properly authenticated. And there's really two impacts of this risk. The first is kind of a normal drip, drip, drip. We've got nosy neighbors. We've got children of, retirees. We've got divorcees in, child care, child support litigation that are calling the bank, asking for account balances and getting them even though they're not the person that owns the account. This is happening way too often, and over time this is really going to lower the confidence that our customers have in us. As importantly, maybe not as high on the likelihood it's going to happen to our bank, but still very, very scary, very, very dangerous, is the notion that the bad guys now are calling American banks to populate databases so that they can know who has the money, so that they can then attack those people. Remember me talking about the bill pay, attack vendor and the first risk that, they're going after our customers? Well, how do they know who to go after if they're not a business? They're using pretext calling to find out by calling your bank and asking whoever answers the phone, what the balance is in an account that maybe they found on the dark web or something. Now they're able to prioritize who they're going to try to attack with, malware or a business email compromise or whatever. The solution to pretext calling risk is by, what we call out-of-wallet questions. It's a means of authenticating callers. It's a means of determining, is the person that I'm talking to on the phone the person that person says he or she is? And so we've got to ask questions that can't be answered by finding a lost or stolen purse or by going out to Facebook, right? And so, mother's maiden name used to be a great out-of-wallet question, but nowadays it's not, because it's too easy to get that information in social media. So you're going to have customers probably talking. Right now, most banks are teaching their employees how to ask out-of-wallet questions. And so I would not be surprised if a customer comes up to you someday on the street and says, hey, last time I called your bank, I needed to get the payoff on a loan, and they asked me what the collateral was for the loan, or they asked me the amount of the deposit that I, for my paycheck or whatever, and it seems kind of weird, right? Well, that's because we need to find ways to authenticate telephone callers. There is a movie available if you want to learn more about asking out-of-wallet questions. It is meant for, bank employees. It's not really meant for directors, but it'll definitely shed light on this problem and how the bank is trying to solve the problem if you're interested. The sixth risk that we're adding to our list for the first time this year is probably controversial. I'll bet that most of our clients don't really see this as a risk. And the reason why is because, well, let's back up. IT people find it kind of awkward to talk about this risk in the first place. But also, we all feel like we can trust the people we work with, right? Or it'd be kind of hard to go to work if we felt like we couldn't trust the people that we work with. We want to trust the people we work with. You as a board want your employees to trust each other. The likelihood is really unknown. We don't really know what the likelihood of this risk is, but the impact is huge. And the reason why is because our customers, they might forgive us if it's Target that cost us to have to change their credit card, and send them a new debit card or whatever, right? They might forgive us if it's, our core processor that caused the breach, or our internet banking provider that caused the breach. But if it was somebody we hired that maliciously harmed our customers, the impact could be black swan. It could be huge. And so we need to define this threat. And Infotex has come up with our own definition, but what we're encouraging your information security officers to do is to basically define the insider threat in your own terms. But what we need to realize is that, A, it's really hard to detect malicious activity if it's being performed by legitimate users of a network. Now, what Infotex does is we watch bank networks and we can see any kind of illegitimate activity. But if it's activity that's being, perpetrated by somebody with credentials, it's kind of hard for us to say, hey, that's not the right activity without specific controls in place. And those controls include segregation, of course, making people take vacations unplugged, cross-training, but then also know that your managed security service provider or whoever's controlling your SIEM can put a watch on assets, they can put a watch on employees, they can put a watch on accounts, so that we have a good deterrent in place. Often the insider threat arises once employees start thinking that, wow, if somebody did that, no one would know. Well, if we can keep changing the way we know what people are doing, we might be able to have a deterrent in place that solves the insider threat risk. The final risk that we face, hopefully, has already been addressed in your bank. But it's the fact that Microsoft is no longer going to support Windows 7 and Windows Server 2008. Now, what that means is that they're no longer going to publish patches for all the vulnerabilities that people keep finding in these two applications. And so hopefully your upgrades are already finished. If you had Windows 7 or Windows Server 2008, you should have had them upgraded by January 14th of this year. But if they're not finished, or if you've got some lingering assets that I'll go into in a minute that might not be patched yet, or might not be upgraded, I should say, then your ISO should be talking to your managed security service provider who can watch for exploits on Windows 7 and Windows Server assets. If you're not upgraded yet, the problem is probably with your vendors, or maybe you have some legacy systems out there that just simply can't be updated, or maybe there's some dependencies. Maybe if you update, your server from, Windows 2008 to Windows 16 or whatever, next thing you know, you've got a situation where applications are breaking. Usually relates to your application publishers and your vendors, but we still need to recognize the risk. And really, by recognizing the risk, we can inform our managed security service provider who can help us mitigate that risk. The longer these systems stay out there, the greater the risk is. So if you want to learn more about this, we do have a couple articles out there on the internet that might be helpful for you to get more information about those risks. What questions should we ask? Now, like I said at the beginning, if you just ask, how does this protect our customers? That in itself becomes a really good question. So, pretty much anything that your information security officer brings into the board meeting can be followed up with that question. I mean, anything. Let's say your information security officer, brings up that we're behind on awareness training. Well, how does this protect our customers? But after a while, let's face it, if every time we ask a question it's how does this protect our customers, our information security officers are going to think that we only have one question, right? And so let's kind of talk about ways we can ask about these main primary controls here. Audit readiness. If we're not ready for an audit anytime, I'm telling you, we're not safe. One of the things we've found by watching all the banks and all the organizations we've worked with since 2020, those that have the bad breaches are the ones that weren't ready for their audits. Those that even though they had a breach, they were able to turn that lemon into lemonade, they're always ready for their audits. And so do you have an organic place, an organic process in place to where you have good, solid audit readiness? So the question you could ask about audit readiness then is when the IT auditor comes in to present the audit, how prepared was our team for the audit? Did you have to ask for stuff more than once? Did they give you all the information you were asking for right off the get-go? Were they available for meetings? Did they look, like they were on top of everything? When they disagree with you, did they have the confidence to push back? That's audit readiness. When we're ready for audits, we're safe. Meanwhile, there's all kinds of great questions that a director can ask about awareness training. The first and foremost being, does our brand new teller, or maybe fast forward, does our teller after 6 months, after they understand the climate, after they know what they can and can't get away with, does that teller feel comfortable going to his or her supervisor saying, hey, I think I just clicked on a wrong link, or I think I just made a big mistake that could cause a breach? Self-reporting is one of the most important parts of a bank culture that, if it's in place, helps us turn lemons to lemonade. Beyond that, when the ISO comes in, maybe how do we ensure our users are properly trained? Are we doing homegrown incident response tests? Or is a third party facilitating them? That question really relates to what we call management awareness training. The best and easiest way to make sure that your management team is properly trained for their role in cybersecurity is to make sure that they're involved in the incident response tests. What are we doing to educate our customers is a great question you can be asking right now because of all the risk we face when it comes to corporate account takeovers, personal account takeovers, business email compromise, malware, ransomware, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, what are the new risks and what are we doing about them is a great question, and that can really be asked in almost every situation as well. When the information security officer brings in the vendor report, well, hey, what new vendors are around here? What kind of new risks are we exposed to because of these new vendors? What are we doing about them? Would make a great question to ask. If the ISO comes in and says, hey, we're falling behind on this or that, well, what are the risks with falling behind on this or that? And can we at least mitigate those risks? These are the kind of questions that you want to be asking on a regular basis in order to, again, keep our management team out of the details enough to realize that the main goal here is to protect our customers. Obviously, this is a movie, so we can't really have a question and answer period now. But if I was you, I would turn to your ISO as soon as he shuts this movie off and say, how does this movie help us protect our customers? And with that, I'd just like to thank you for your time again, and seriously, your customers, they don't know it, but they really appreciate the fact that you're willing to dedicate this amount of time to the cybersecurity process in your bank.
Thanks, Dan. And thank you all for taking the time to join us.
When you view an infotex webinar or movie, you do so with 4 caveats. First, you're agreeing to the terms posted at the web page listed on this slide. Second, our lawyers want you to know that what infotex presents is often time-dated or about new trends, regulations, or guidance, and therefore we cannot provide this material with any warranty whatsoever. Thirdly, material provided with infotex webinars and movies is copyrighted. You keep the copyright to material customized to your organization, but Infotex reserves the right to use the material in other engagements and boilerplates. See our transfer of copyright agreement at the webpage listed in this slide. Finally, those who view our webinars or movies may be added to an email mailing list. If you do not wish to receive notice of additional educational opportunities, please accept our apologies and please opt out at the web page shown on this slide.